Welcome to Module 6. This is the last module in our course and one that I hope will help pull together many of the pieces of the research puzzle into a more coherent picture of the process. But let's first talk about your assignments for this last module. First, your concept map assignment during this module will enable you to explore in greater depth one research designer approach, as well as enjoy presentations by your colleagues who will be exploring the same or other research approaches, and you'll have a chance to have a look at their presentations. You will also complete a forum that will be based on viewing your colleagues' videos and then responding to the question posed on your forum page that will ask you to make a link between what you're viewing in the presentations and what the authors of the article I'm going to be talking about in this video talk about it in relation to doing a research project and following a research approach. All right, so let's explore the last reading in our course. Noella Mackenzie and Sally Knipe are both academics from Australia who worked at the same university when they wrote this paper. Noella is at Charles Sturt University and Sally Knipe is at La Trobe University. They have similar research interests, and they begin their paper by noting the confusion that exists, especially for beginning researchers, about various research terms and the misunderstandings that many of us perpetuate in using those terms. I'm guessing they maybe were doing a course together, or maybe this was an ongoing frustration of theirs, but at any rate, they decided that they were going to write a paper that would help in addressing some of these issues. They begin by considering language around research and conceptualizations around qualitative and quantitative research, that great divide. Mackenzie and Knipe argue that the qualitative and quantitative debate that has gone on for several decades now is an either-or mindset that causes confusion and false understandings of the complexity of research approaches. Quantitative, of course, as we've talked about before, was preferred in the natural and mechanical sciences and then transposed to the human sciences as they emerged in academia. This proved unsatisfactory in many ways for the kinds of questions being researched. And we've talked about this before as well. So qualitative methodologies gradually became a more legitimate approach in the human sciences. Researchers may even use mixed methods to explore research questions in the human sciences, usually depending more on qualitative methods, but incorporating quantitative methods as well. And certainly it can be the reverse of that as well. Too often, however, these terms, quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods, are used as broad characterizations of the kind of research being done, which is not very helpful as it does not help clearly differentiate paradigms, methodologies, and methods, and the tools that people use in doing their research. It's kind of a shorthand for what we're actually involved in when we do research. So let's look at that larger picture that Mackenzie and Knipe refer to. Moving beyond the quantitative-qualitative debate, Mackenzie and Knipe reviewed over 40 research texts that are used for courses, that are referenced quite often, that sort of thing, for this paper, and noticed the various ways in which the term paradigm was defined. The authors propose that 4 paradigms predominate, but if you and I'll be talking about those in a moment, but if you think back to Guba and Lincoln, you'll see some similarities here around the meaning of paradigms. This slide actually demonstrates some of the perspectives in the literature that they refer to. But first of all, they talk about this kind of conflation of the terms theoretical framework and paradigm, and they are often used interchangeably. They have, some could argue, slightly different meanings, but they're very, very close in meaning, and so you'll often see in a paper that you'll read or a dissertation or whatever, that somebody will talk about their theoretical framework, and what they're really meaning or what they're talking about is the word paradigm. So in many ways they're kind of interchangeable. The paradigm, they argue, sets down the intent, motivation, and expectations for the research. And although they quote many of the different ways in which people have talked about paradigms in these papers that they reviewed, the one that kind of struck me because it was slightly different than some of the others that we've talked about, and I think it's very succinct. These authors that are listed here talk about a paradigm as a belief about the nature of knowledge, or the epistemology, one could say, a methodology, and a criteria for validity or trustworthiness if we're talking about qualitative research. So all of this discussion is actually very helpful in sorting through notions about paradigms in their paper, and I would, I hope that you'll find it that way as well. Beginning with the historically predominant paradigms are positivist, post-positivist, where we're talking, when we talk about a positivist paradigm, we're talking about something that is deterministic in the sense that it causes determined effects. For example, if you lower the temperature to 0 Celsius, that is, water will freeze. If it doesn't take into account other contexts, if we were freezing it on the moon or whatever it might be. But a post-positivist theoretical framework means that theories do not exist in isolation, and they're fallible. So reality is seen as determined until it can be disproven. So it remains within within this domain, but it opens up possibilities. Both are about explanation, one could argue. Interpretivism and constructivism are about understanding of the human condition and social phenomena. From this perspective, reality is not determined, but rather it is socially constructed. So unlike positivism and post-positivism, which is viewed as value-free, this perhaps a little less so, this perspective doesn't even try to be value-free, but rather invites a discussion around values and makes that very much a part of what's going on in the research. A transformative paradigm comes out of a dissatisfaction with dominant norms that serve the interests of dominant social actors. And in this case, then, research needs to lead to social change that will increase, pardon me, will increase social justice for those who are marginalized by the dominant class, whatever that may be considered to be. So, for example, cisgendered are the dominant norm, that is, those who identify with their sexed being and are comfortable within that role as compared to, for example, transgender people. So we have those who are within the dominant norm and those who are outside the dominant norm and are marginalized as a result. Pragmatic research isn't committed to a particular philosophy or view of reality. Rather, the research question itself is central. And so it's really about getting to the answer. This is very helpful, a helpful approach when in a government context, for example, or if it's a very specific kind of question that calls on a very specific kind of approach, where one doesn't have to consider the ideological parameters around that particular question. Methodology, then, is an overall approach to research that is linked to the paradigm or theoretical framework. This is where the language can become very confusing, as it's difficult to see where the methodological approaches fit with one another, and there are so many of them. So as you can see here, within a post-positivist paradigm, we have several methodologies that are listed underneath, and we could keep going. This particularly becomes true on this side of the ledger, particularly these two, where we haven't even talked about here, for example, postmodernism. We have not talked about queer theory, Here we haven't talked about various approaches that would fall under the interpretivist constructivist framework. And so we have these kind of multiple umbrella terms that fit underneath each of the paradigms that we consider a methodology. That is the overall approach to research linked to a paradigm or theoretical framework. So here their definition is methodology is the frame of reference for the research, which is influenced by the paradigm in which our theoretical perspective is placed or developed. So this is kind of helpful in thinking about what is a methodology, and particularly when we compare it to methods. All right. So I meant to give you an example here. So for example, if a researcher is exploring a question related to the effects of the ways in which homophobic language, for example, which is known to marginalized LGBTQ plus young people, is handled by staff in schools with the purpose of implementing more supportive practices, then it's fairly easy to suggest that a transformative paradigm with a critical methodology would be appropriate. It could be something else, you could choose something else, but you could argue for that, it would be appropriate. So far so good, but what does that mean in terms of what the researcher might actually do? So, if the methodology is linked to the paradigm, then the methods are linked to the paradigm as well, as I said before. So to get back to our projected research project, if our paradigm is transformative and our methodology is critical, we'll have to imagine that there's another column in here, couldn't fit that in. We may want to include an historical perspective in our lit review. So here we have a suggestion, for example, of contextual and historical factors are described, especially as they relate to the kind of oppression that you're talking about. We may want to look at statistics related. So here we have a suggestion of both qualitative and quantitative, and perhaps mixed methods being used. So we could look at statistics related to student success or lack of success, for example. We might even want to look at suicide rates, for example, and provide that historical background, and that would probably go in our literature review. And then we could choose qualitative methods to explore the research question within a particular school or a school district. And we're going to choose a particular data collection tool then that's appropriate and gives voice to the oppressed. So here we have a particular condition that fits within the ideology of the paradigm, and that is there's a particular need to avoid discrimination, and in fact we want to make the voices of those who are oppressed more visible and heard in a more predominant way, so that those they're centered rather than the dominant group. So so we could then choose something like interviews with students who identify as LGBTQ+. We could pair that with interviews with the teachers to see how they view the same phenomena, etc. It could be focus groups. There could be a joint group following those more small group interviews, etc. So there's a whole range of ways in which that could be approached. You could use the arts as well to draw out things that might be difficult to talk about in any other kind of way. So there are a whole range of ways in which we could then give voice to the oppressed and gain insight into how practices could be transformed. And we could come up with an example for each of these if we wanted to take the time. So once we've gone through that whole process, then the fun begins, and it can get messy. So while this diagram, you choose your area of inquiry and you come up with a paradigm, and you fit a methodology with that paradigm, and then you choose methods that fit with the methodology, that fit with the paradigm, that will answer the that will answer the question, and then you choose your data collection tools. Well, it can look really neat, but even though it sounds neat and tidy, it can be very messy. For example, you may travel back and forth along this research trajectory, particularly in the planning stages. Research, while it might appear linear in all of the neat diagrams about the research steps to follow, is a constant process of checking, rechecking. Does this work? Was my approach helpful? And so on and so on. And in terms of data collection tools, they cross most of the boundaries. For example, interviews, surveys, etc., are used across paradigms, especially when mixing methods, of course. And despite the messiness, underneath it is a structure that will be helpful in ensuring your project is valid or trustworthy, depending on the approach that you're using. So let's then review that foundation. So first and foundationally is the paradigm. Building on that paradigm is the methodology. The next step in our research structure is methods, and then your data collection tools. Once all of that is done, your analysis is the final step, and Mackenzie and Knight don't discuss that, as it is so varied depending on each level of the structure you've built. And that language is actually a little less confusing and mutable as the language around various aspects of research tend to be. And besides, we can go back to Creswell and Guterman, who provide lots of ideas for organizing for your analysis and the analysis process itself. You will, of course, also be assisted throughout the process of your own research by your instructor in the various courses that you'll take, and I have no doubt that your research will make a worthwhile contribution to the school, community, or school district that you're doing your research within. And others as well who happen to read your research or listen to a presentation that you might give about your research. So, since this is my last opportunity to speak with you, at least via video, I'll be speaking to you in other ways, of course, as the module goes forward. I just want to wish you all the best. Once our course is done, as you complete your courses and your research project, I really do want to wish you the very, very best. And of course, if there's any way I can help without interfering with the process you're engaged in with your instructor in the courses that you'll be taking further on from this, I would be happy to do so. And if you're ever out this way to Victoria, I live a block and a half from wonderful coffee shops and restaurants, and it would be great to meet over a libation of some sort. That'll be your choice, and we can chat in person. I'd really enjoy that. So do email me. My email will be the same, and let me know, because that would be a lot of fun. So all the very best as you move forward with your program and with this module. And I'm looking forward to your presentations very, very much.